Something happened last night that you may not understand yet. It was quiet. There may have been no dramatic announcement, no obvious sign, and no message waiting on your phone when you woke up. Yet something shifted. Somewhere, a conversation took place, a thought became impossible to ignore, and a person connected to your story may have finally admitted something they had been trying to hide from themselves. And now, this message has found its way to you at a moment when your heart may be asking questions your mind cannot answer. You may have been wondering why certain memories keep returning. Why one particular person keeps crossing your thoughts at unexpected moments. Why you sometimes feel as though there is an unfinished conversation hanging in the air between you and someone from your past or someone you have not fully understood yet. Maybe you thought you had already moved on, maybe you told yourself that it was better not to think about it anymore, maybe you decided that if someone truly cared, they would simply say what they felt instead of leaving you surrounded by uncertainty. But last night, something changed. The person you associate with this message may have reached a point where silence no longer feels comfortable. They may have replayed old conversations, remembered things they once overlooked, and realized that some words were never spoken when they should have been, and that is why the feeling around this moment may seem different. There is a conversation waiting to happen, not necessarily a perfect conversation. Not necessarily one that answers every question immediately. But a conversation that could finally bring honesty into a situation that has been filled with assumptions, hesitation, and unanswered questions. You may be wondering what they want to say. The first thing is simple. They want you to know that they noticed more than they ever admitted. They noticed your kindness. They noticed the way you listened. They noticed the moments when you tried to understand them even when they were difficult to understand. They noticed the times you gave them space instead of demanding answers. They noticed the little things you probably assumed meant nothing. And perhaps the strangest part is that some of those little things stayed with them. A sentence, a look, a conversation, a moment when you were simply yourself. You may have forgotten it, but they did not. Sometimes people understand the value of something only after they have enough distance to look at it honestly. When everything is happening, emotions can be confusing. Pride can become louder than affection. Fear can disguise itself as indifference. And uncertainty can make someone behave in ways that do not match what they actually feel. That may be what happened here. This person may have spent more time pretending to be unaffected than actually being unaffected. They may have convinced themselves that staying quiet was easier. They may have told themselves that waiting was safer. They may even have believed that you would always be there whenever they finally became ready to speak. But time has a way of challenging assumptions. Last night may have brought one of those moments. Something reminded them of you. Perhaps it was a song, a place, an old photograph, a familiar name, or a completely ordinary moment that suddenly carried an extraordinary emotional weight, and for a few minutes, they could not push the memory away. They began thinking about what might have happened if they had been more honest. What if they had spoken sooner? What if they had not allowed fear to control their decisions? What if they had trusted the connection instead of constantly questioning it? What if the distance between you was never truly about a lack of feeling, Those questions can become powerful when someone has spent a long time avoiding them, and now you may be standing at the edge of an important realization. You do not need to chase anyone to prove your worth. You do not need to force a conversation. You do not need to convince someone that you matter. If someone has something meaningful to say, they have the responsibility to communicate it honestly and respectfully. That is important because this message is not about waiting endlessly for another person. It is about recognizing that your own heart deserves clarity. Maybe you have spent too much time interpreting silence. Maybe you have tried to understand every delayed response, every change in behavior, every moment of closeness followed by distance. Maybe you have asked yourself, "What did I do wrong?" But what if the answer was never about you? What if their confusion belonged to them? What if their hesitation came from their own fears, circumstances, or inability to communicate? Sometimes another person's uncertainty can make you question yourself when you never needed to, and perhaps this is the part they want you to understand. You are not invisible. You are not insignificant. You are not foolish for caring. You are simply dealing with someone who may not have known how to handle their own emotions. That does not excuse hurtful behavior. It does not erase the past, and it does not mean you have to accept anything simply because someone finally decides to speak, but it can explain why the story may have felt so confusing. The person connected to this message may have been carrying an internal conflict. One side of them wanted to reach out, another side told them to stay away. One side wanted honesty. Another side feared the consequences of honesty. One side remembered the good moments. Another side remembered every reason they believed things could never work. And last night, those two sides may have collided. That is why their next move could feel unexpected. They may finally decide that avoiding the conversation is more painful than having it. And when that happens, you may hear words you have been waiting for, not necessarily the exact words you imagined, not necessarily a dramatic declaration. It may begin with something very simple. "I need to tell you something." Those words can carry enormous weight when they come from someone who has been silent for a long time. They may explain that they were scared. They may admit they did not know what they wanted. They may acknowledge that they handled certain moments poorly. They may tell you that they thought about reaching out many times but kept stopping themselves. And they may finally admit that the distance did not erase the memories. But listen carefully when that conversation comes. Do not only listen for the words you want to hear. Listen for honesty. Listen for accountability. Listen for respect. Listen for whether their actions match what they are saying. Because real clarity is not created by dramatic promises. It is created when words and behavior begin moving in the same direction. You deserve that kind of clarity. You deserve communication that does not leave you constantly guessing. You deserve relationships where you can express yourself without fear of being punished for having feelings. You deserve people who can tell you the truth even when the truth is uncomfortable. And perhaps this is why the timing of this message matters. Something may be ending. But that does not necessarily mean the connection is ending. Sometimes what ends is confusion. Sometimes what ends is avoidance. Sometimes what ends is the version of a story built entirely from assumptions. And once that disappears, reality can finally be seen clearly. Maybe you will discover that this person truly wants to repair something. Maybe you will discover that they simply needed to express something they had carried for too long. Maybe you will realize that you were waiting for an answer that you no longer need. Any of those outcomes can bring freedom. Do not be afraid of the truth simply because it may be different from the story you imagined. Truth can hurt for a moment, but uncertainty can keep you trapped for much longer. And there is another reason this moment may feel important. You are changing too. You are not the same person you were when this story began. You have learned. You have grown. You have experienced disappointment. You have discovered parts of yourself that you did not know existed. You have learned that love is not supposed to require you to disappear. You have learned that caring about someone does not mean abandoning yourself. You have learned that patience is valuable, but endless waiting is not the same thing as patience. You have learned that hope can be beautiful, but hope should never become an excuse to ignore reality. And because you have changed, the conversation may not affect you in the same way it would have months ago. Perhaps once, you would have accepted any explanation just to keep someone close. Now you may want something deeper. You may want truth. You may want consistency. You may want peace. You may want to know where you actually stand. That is growth. And perhaps the person you are thinking about has noticed that change. They may sense that you are no longer willing to remain inside an endless cycle of uncertainty. They may realize that if they want a place in your life, they cannot keep communicating through silence. That realization can create urgency, not panic, not desperation. Urgency born from understanding that opportunities do not remain open forever. Maybe they have been assuming you would always be waiting. Last night may have challenged that assumption. They may have wondered whether you have already moved forward, whether someone else has entered your life, whether you still think about them, whether you would even answer if they reached out. And suddenly, the possibility of losing the chance to speak may have become real. That can be the moment when someone finally chooses courage over avoidance. But remember something important. You do not have to decide the entire future in one conversation. You do not have to immediately forgive. You do not have to immediately trust. You do not have to immediately define the relationship. You are allowed to listen. You are allowed to pause. You are allowed to say, "I need time to think about this." You are allowed to protect your peace. If this person genuinely cares about you, they will respect your boundaries. They will understand that trust cannot always be restored through one emotional conversation. Trust is rebuilt through consistency. It is built through patience. It is built through actions repeated over time. So if the conversation comes, let it be a conversation rather than a test. Do not try to predict every sentence before it happens. Do not rehearse every possible response. Do not let fear turn the moment into something it has not yet become. Simply listen. Let them speak. Then listen to yourself. What happens inside you when you hear their words? Do you feel respected? Do you feel pressured? Do you feel understood? Do you feel like they are taking responsibility? Or do you feel as though they are trying to make you responsible for emotions that belong to them? Your feelings can give you information. And perhaps that is the deeper message hidden inside everything that happened last night. This is not only about what your soulmate wants to say. It is also about what you finally need to hear from yourself. You need to hear that you are worthy of honesty. You need to hear that you do not have to earn someone's respect. You need to hear that rejection does not define your value. You need to hear that someone's inability to communicate does not mean you were not enough. You need to hear that your future is bigger than one person's decision. And maybe the most important thing of all is this: do not lose yourself while waiting for someone else to find themselves. If they come forward, let them come forward. If they speak, let them speak. If they apologize, decide for yourself whether their apology is meaningful. If they ask for another chance, remember that you are allowed to take your time. Your heart is not a courtroom where someone can suddenly arrive with an emotional speech and demand an immediate verdict. Your heart is your home. You decide who receives access to it. And perhaps the person who wants to talk to you right now is beginning to understand that. Maybe they finally realize that having feelings for someone is not enough. Feelings have to be accompanied by responsibility. Care has to be accompanied by respect. And promises have to be accompanied by action. That is the conversation that truly matters. Not the loudest words. Not the most dramatic confession, not the most emotional message, the truth. Maybe last night was the beginning of that truth. Maybe a conversation took place between them and someone they trust. Maybe they finally admitted what they had been denying. Maybe someone asked them a simple question: why don't you just tell them? And perhaps they had no good answer. Because sometimes the hardest thing is not knowing what you feel. The hardest thing is accepting that you can no longer hide from it. Maybe they finally recognized that every excuse had become weaker than the truth. Maybe they realized that silence had already communicated something. And maybe they do not want that silence to be the final chapter. That does not guarantee what will happen next, but it can mean something has changed inside the story, and now, you are being reminded to stay grounded. Do not let excitement make decisions for you. Do not let fear make decisions for you either. Let clarity guide you. If someone reaches out, meet their words with calmness. If they explain themselves, hear them. If they apologize, consider their actions. If they ask for another chance, ask yourself whether the relationship would actually be healthier this time. And if the conversation reveals that you are better apart, remember that this can also be a form of healing. Sometimes closure does not look like getting the person back. Sometimes closure looks like finally understanding why things happened the way they did. Sometimes the most beautiful ending is not a reunion, it is peace. So when you hear the words they have been holding back, do not be afraid. You are stronger than the uncertainty that came before this moment. You are wiser than the version of yourself who once needed every answer immediately. And you are allowed to move slowly. If this person truly wants to speak, they can speak clearly. If they truly want to be understood, they can listen too. If they truly value you, they will not demand that you abandon your boundaries to prove your feelings. That is the standard you can carry forward. And perhaps tonight, when everything becomes quiet again, you will think about this moment differently. You may realize that the message was never simply about someone else coming toward you. It was about you becoming ready to receive truth without losing yourself inside it. Maybe the next message will surprise you. Maybe the next conversation will answer a question you have carried for a long time. Maybe you will hear an apology. Maybe you will hear an explanation. Maybe you will hear a confession of feelings. or maybe you will finally hear something even more important, the truth that allows you to release what you have been carrying. Whatever happens, remember that your future does not depend on one person's decision. You are still moving forward, you are still growing, you are still becoming someone who knows what respect, honesty, and peace feel like. And if someone from your past or present wants to walk beside you, they must meet you with that same honesty, so do not miss the lesson hidden inside this moment. Something happened last night. Perhaps it was a realization, perhaps it was a conversation, perhaps it was simply the moment when someone finally admitted to themselves what they had been avoiding. But now the next part belongs to both of you. They must decide whether they are willing to speak, and you must decide what you will do with the truth once you hear it. Do not rush, do not chase, do not beg, do not prove. Simply remain open to clarity while protecting your peace, because sometimes the most powerful response is not an immediate answer. Sometimes it is a calm heart saying, "I am listening. Tell me the truth," and if those words finally come, remember everything you have learned. Remember the nights you questioned yourself. Remember the moments you felt uncertain. Remember how much you have grown. Then listen, not only to what they say, but to what their honesty reveals, because this conversation may not be about bringing back the past, it may be about deciding what deserves a place in your future, and perhaps that is why this moment feels so important. Someone may finally be ready to talk, but this time, you are ready to listen without forgetting who you are. And now, after everything that happened, there is another part of the story you need to hear, because the conversation you have been waiting for may not begin in the way you imagined. Sometimes the most important words do not arrive with a dramatic entrance. Sometimes they begin with hesitation, a long pause, a simple greeting, or a message that looks ordinary until you realize how much courage it took for someone to finally send it. This person may have opened your conversation more than once and then closed it again. They may have typed something, erased it, rewritten it, and stared at the screen without knowing whether they should press send. They may have wondered whether you would be angry. They may have wondered whether you would ignore them. They may have wondered whether you had already stopped caring. And behind all those questions was one much deeper question they were afraid to ask themselves. What if I waited too long? That thought may have stayed with them throughout the night, because time changes people, distance changes perspective, and silence eventually forces people to confront what they were trying not to feel. Maybe they thought staying away would make the feelings disappear. Maybe they believed that if enough days passed, the memories would become less powerful. But instead, something unexpected happened. The memories became clearer. They began remembering details they had forgotten. They remembered the way you responded when they were struggling. They remembered moments when you made them laugh. They remembered conversations that seemed insignificant at the time but became meaningful later. And perhaps they finally understood that what mattered was never one perfect moment. It was the collection of little moments, the small things, the things that cannot easily be explained to someone else. That realization can be powerful because people often understand the value of a connection only after they stop experiencing it every day. And now they may be asking themselves whether they made a mistake. But there is something they need to understand too: missing someone does not automatically mean everything should return to the way it was. Love does not erase responsibility. The connection does not erase the need for healthy communication, and history does not guarantee a future. If this person wants to come back into your life, they have to understand that you are not standing in the same place where they left you. You have changed. Your expectations have changed. Your understanding of yourself has changed. You have learned what you can tolerate and what you cannot. You have learned that being emotionally available does not mean accepting confusion. You have learned that someone's fear should never become your burden. And perhaps they can sense that, maybe. That is what makes them nervous. They may realize that the person they are approaching now is stronger than the person they remember. You are no longer willing to accept half-truths simply because they come.